press my ear against the narrow doorway and a scream cuts through the corridor. Guilt clamps down under my tongue the instant I recognize the cadence. Guilt drives me forward, and I do what I have learned to do: identify, mark, record. The scream says Merrick in 3 syllables, sharp, raw, the second note held too long, and my hand reaches for the frayed notebook before the sound finishes. I write the name down with the same motion I used to lock a gate. The noise in the passage, boots, a lighter, a distant cough, pushes me back into the work that keeps me breathing. I am Silas Venn. I am a guard at the camp. I keep the ledger to impose order. I am also quietly its instrument. That pulled sound of Marek's throat is the problem I carry. If I can pick a man from his pain, the camp will use that knowledge. That fact sits on the table between the ledger and the whistle. A breath rattles behind me. I step away from the doorway. The corridor smells of wet wool and burning oil. The candle in my pocket has a thin face of smoke on its flame. Marek's scream is already small by the time I make the mark. I close the notebook and slip it beneath my coat. I walk toward the yard with the ledger folded like a dirty handkerchief. At roll call, Commander Harrow stands in his heavy coat and reads from the ledger as if it were a set of instructions. He does not look at me when he says names. He only looks at the paper and the men on their knees. Silas, Harrow says to me after he names one whose arm is black with bruises. Confirm. I hold my throat. Lieutenant Rook watches my face. There is a small, quick tilt in his mouth that always means suspicion. I clear my voice. Confirmed, I say. My voice is steady, but the word tastes like pennies. Commander Harrow nods and stamps a boot twice. Then we proceed. The yard is bright with early sun that has no mercy. Men line up, hands at their sides, eyes lowered. The ledger sits on a crate. Harrow opens it where my handwriting leans into a cramped column. He does not ask how I know. He presumes my expertise and feeds it into procedure. This is the second emotional shift, from taut guilt to a hollow acquiescence. I act because action keeps me spared the first panic. Old engineer, someone calls. The old engineer steps forward with his back bent like a closed hinge. He looks at me, then at Harrow. Silas, the entry today. Harrow says, read it. The old engineer does not argue. He knows better than to ask why his name might appear. He only waits like a man who has learned the rhythm of punishment. Later, in the tool room, the old engineer slips a small, wrapped thing into my palm while I write. He does it with the thin suspicion of a man who understands bribery as a currency of survival. I hold the parcel and feel its grit. He watches me with both hands limp and says in a voice scraped by age, Silas, a softer mark. I place the parcel on the bench and do not open it. Why would you? I begin. He leans so close I smell machine oil and boiled cabbage. Because you listen, Silas. You hear what we keep hidden. Return one line gentler. The ledger is in my coat. The third emotional shift arrives. Doubt. Doubt nudges at my methods for the first time in months. I finger the battered whistle in my pocket. The whistle is a small, clean instrument. It calls men to order and then to rows of suffering. The old engineer's hand trembles. He waits for a favor with the patience of broken people. My hand goes to the notebook anyway. I write a note that softens a phrase, adding an evasive mark to the margin that will save a backhanded strike from reporting. I do it because the old engineer's eyes are empty and I have spent more nights cataloging than sleeping. I do it because saving one bruise feels like buying a coin of conscience. At midday I return to the toolroom ledger to copy the day's injuries. Merrick comes in with a limp and a hand wrapped in filthy cloth. He hears my pen on paper. He watches the way I watch hands. Merrick, I say, naming him because I must. He flinches so hard the breath leaves him. His voice is a rasp. Silas, you did not call for me, I tell him. You listen, he replies. You always listen. He says it with a rueful smile that does not reach his eyes. The old engineer leans against a table cluttered with cogs and scraps. Silas, one line, please, he says again, but this time there is a softness in his tone that catches in my chest and does not let go. We trade short lines. The conversation is the kind that moves objects. It passes the parcel of decision from one hand to another without explanations. At afternoon in the infirmary, a prisoner hears a repeated cadence on the ward and lifts his head. He points with his chin toward the doorway. That signature, he says. I heard that once before. Lieutenant Rook comes forward and asks questions. What did you hear exactly? He demands. The prisoner says it was a long second, like a rope taking weight. Rook's eyes find me. He steps toward me and the air between us tightens. He says, "Silas, explain your ledger." I answer in the only way I know how, with specifics. I describe the sound I hear when Marek cries. I mention the pitch, the way his vowels break mid-note. I say the exact time I made the entry. I do not confess motive. I give procedural detail because the camp honors procedure over conscience. Rook's mouth flattens. "So you make the list and we act on it." "You act," I say, and the words are thin. This is an exchange of accusation. The fourth emotional shift moves under my ribs, from doubt toward defensive numbness. Night falls like a closed iron door when Harrow drags me to the punishment pit. The torches throw a wash of orange that looks violent against the skin of men. Harrow's shadow is long. He puts the ledger flat on a table near the pit and opens it as though preparing scripture. "Silas," Harrow says, "confirm this man." I do not ask questions. Rook stands to my left and watches my hands. The old engineer is there with both hands folded like an apology. The victim is already bound and breathing in a rhythm of pain. My ear finds the sound. Marek has a sound. I hear the signature I marked earlier in the workshop. The same vowel break, the same quarter note hitch. It is unmistakable. The whole world narrows to that sound and my pen. I write his name, one clean line, and slide the ledger toward Harrow. The pen scratches against the paper and the scratch is louder than anything else in that moment. Harrow takes the ledger and reads the name aloud. He nods. "Proceed," he says. They pull the man forward and the lesson begins. The camp has a choreography for corrections. A man is placed, a tool is used, orders are given. The screams will be recorded later in the ledger as another line. I stand with my hands folded because fear keeps my motions minimal. I am both recorder and executor in that minute. When the screams stop, the line in the ledger is a hard fact. I have moved from doubt to complicity. The fifth emotional shift is a slide into coldness that numbs my initial shock. I feel the ledger like a weight at my ribs. Afterward, in the guard shack, Rook pokes at me with words like metal bristles. "Silas, you knew you wrote it. Were you counting on that exact sound?" he asks. "Yes," I say. "I do not add reasons. So you calculated a man's sentence by sound," Rook says. "Silas, that is necessary." I cut in. The word is small but hard. I say it because Harrow will call it procedure, and because I want to place the cause somewhere outside my hands. Harrow leans against the doorframe. "Procedure," he agrees. "Order." Rook paces. "You could have lied. Lie to save a man. For what, to be found out and killed?" I ask. "He was asking for mercy," Rook says. "And how do you think mercy is brought here?" I answer. The conversation turns sharp between us. We exchange 3 short lines quickly. "You could have risked it. E and I sooner know." "Silas, are you proud?" Rook demands. I do not answer. I tap the ledger with my fingers until the rhythm calms me. Late, alone by a sputtering candle, I open the ledger. My handwriting runs down the page in columns of names and small notations about the type of cry or wound. I do not look for art in it. I look for order. My fingers stop on a tally of several men whose names now live as entries rather than as people. I remember specifics instead of abstract guilt. I remember Marek's left thumb bent the wrong way from a missed strike. I remember the old engineer pressing a tiny parcel into my palm with 2 fingertips gone collused. I remember Rook's mouth as he paced. Memory arrives as concrete pieces. The smell of boiled cabbage, the screech of leather, the rusty weight of the whistle. I do not think of pieces of memory. I think of those exact smells and sounds. My thumb rubs the margin where I once erased a harsher line for the old engineer. I consider destroying the ledger. That would be an action that changes tomorrow. It is a clear choice. Burn it and trust my memory, or keep it as an accounting instrument. A sudden knock on the thin door makes me flinch. The knock is quick, 2 hard raps that mean urgency. I close the ledger. The knock comes again, slower. Someone calls, "Silas." I open the door a crack. It is Marek in the corridor. Candlelight from the infirmary pooling behind him. His face is swollen. His eyes are wet. He does not stumble. He stands with his chin up. "Silas," he says, "you wrote my name." My hand tightens on the ledger. "Marek." He steps into the shack without asking. The door closes behind him. "Why?" he asks in 3 short words. I think of the old engineer's parcel, of Harrow's stamp, of Rook's pacing. "Because I can pick you by your sound," I say. Marek looks like he expected that answer and not the other. His lips press into a hard line. "You could have lied," he says. "You could have written anything. You know what happens to liars here," I answer. My voice does not shake. He moves a step closer, so close I can see the split in his lower lip. "Silas, if you hate us, say it. If you think you saved yourself, say it." "I don't hate you," I say. I reach out and place the ledger on the table between us. My hand shakes once and I tap the book as though to steady it. "And keep order." Merrick slaps the ledger with his palm and the sound is flat in the small room. "Order?" He spits. "Your order." We exchange 3 quick lines. The cadence is sharp and raw. "Merrick, don't make this worse. You already did." "Maybe." There is a beat where neither of us breathes loud. He searches my face and finds the scar over my left eyebrow and the hollow cheeks. He touches the pocket where the whistle sits. "The whistle," he says. "You wear it like it keeps you clean." I put my hand over his as if the gesture could make the ledger lighter. "Do you want me to burn it?" I ask. He presses his fingers to the paper. "No, keep it. Remember us." He stands up, limps to the door, and leaves without looking back. The click of the latch is small, final. I realize then that I have resolved something concrete. I chose to keep the ledger. I did not destroy it. I did not hand it to fire. I chose to preserve the account and my place in it. I write one more line before dawn. It is not about Merrick. It is about myself. I note the time and the exact sound elements that allowed me to pick him. Then I make a final entry. A smudged line where I write "return" beside the old engineer's name, ambiguous enough to let hope remain possible and not enough to alter the record. Outside at first light, Harrow checks the ledger and flips to the page I closed last night. He reads the smudge and nods. "Keep it presentable," he tells me. "A clean ledger is necessary." I tuck it away under my coat and walk out to the yard. Merrick is there, but not tied to the post. He moves with a careful stiffness that says the lesson has been learned. Rook is already on his rounds, eyes shifting. The old engineer stands by the gate, his hands folded, watching me like a man who expects a reckoning. I have acted in this chapter. I identified by sound I recorded, I modified one entry for a favor, I handed a name to authority, and I kept the ledger. The mini-conflict, the moment where my knowledge would become a death sentence for a man, was decided when the pen completed the name and Harrow ordered the action. The immediate outcome is sealed. For now, the ledger remains, my hand still on it, and the choice to confess or to destroy waits on a later day. I close the chapter in the same way I opened it, with a physical act. I feed the ledger into the inner pocket of my coat, button it shut, and click the whistle against its brass ring. The whistle is hollow in my palm. A man calls across the yard. I lift my head and answer with my uniformed steps, the ledger against my chest like a second heartbeat. The camp continues its work, and I keep a list of who screamed when and how, because that is the job I have made for myself. The ledger stays with me as the candle guttering mirrors my dwindling defenses, and the knock at the door from Merrick remains a fresh cut. The chapter ends with me taking one measured step toward the command table where Harrow already waits for the morning report. The first lash landed before I finished the sentence in my head. Guilt tightened my jaw the moment the prisoner screamed. The sound had a rhythm I had learned to read and a consonant I could place like a bead on a string. I wrote without looking. I had to write. The wind pushed the scent of wet leather and old blood toward me, and I kept my shoulders set as if posture alone could keep the ledger honest. My name matters less in that yard than a neat column of names, still. I am Silas Venn, 38, lean, wearing the same faded olive coat I wore the day I left the town where Thomas once loaded carts for a living. The ledger is my rule. Guilt, plain heavy guilt, was the reason I began the ledger, and guilt moves the choices I make now. I stand on the parapet, one hand on the cold iron rail, the other on the small battered notebook with its frayed cover, and I catalogue a human voice as cleanly as I can. The lash takes a single prisoner's shoulder. He folds and breathes. The second cry arrives. Higher, ragged, the second vowel held a beat too long. Merrick's cry had that hold. I had once pressed my ear to a doorway and learned Merrick's cadence. The memory burned into the ledger's edge. I mark the page, write a shortened, then write a name I can read when others ask. A guard coughs 2 paces behind me. I do not look back. Sergeant Cade steps beside me and says, "What did you get?" He speaks Cade's name like a blunt instrument. His boots scrape the metal walkway. His breath fogs. I keep my pen moving, Merrick. I say. The word leaves my mouth flat. Cade smacks the rail and says, "Good. Keep that up." We need fewer mistakes. Cade expects efficiency. He expects obedience measured by how many names I can tie to a sound. He does not expect hesitation. When I pause, he leans in and makes the thin threat that keeps most men straight. "Silas, you know what comes from mistakes. Remember Merrick." He spits the name like a promise and walks away. I follow the protocol. A name, a mark, a shorten that other guards can read even in dim light. The ledger is not a notebook of mercy. It is a tool of administration. When I record a name, men vanish into schedules of punishment, interrogations, absences. The ledger converts a scream into an allocation. Who is punished tonight? Who gets bread? Who gets the rope? I used to tell myself that ordering names was order. Now I tell myself nothing and write faster. After the yard, Cade drifts toward the guard walkway exit. He turns, reaches toward me, and his voice pulls harder. "You did the right thing. That one will fetch the rest in line. How many can you place tonight?" The question is a lever. He wants the ledger thick with confirmations so the camp runs smooth when officers clock rounds. At the edge of the yard, a younger guard tries to ask a question and Cade cuts him off. "Silas, the ledger is not sentimental. Identify or you will make work for me." He looks at me for another breath, then nods to the yard. The order hangs. I fold my hands around my pen. I do not tell Cade about the nights I stayed awake listing names by rhythm and by tempo. I do not tell him about Merrick. The medic tent smells of camphor and boiled rags. Liska lifts a torn shirt and taps a wound with a practiced indifference that doesn't reach her eyes. She looks at me the way someone checks the burn on a stove, practical, impatient, but careful not to scald. "Did you hear that one?" she asks without naming the man. I nod. "Who was it?" Liska says. Her voice is low like a pulley. The wounded man breathes through clenched teeth. The medic's hands are steady. She asks me as if testing a theory. I turn the ledger so she can see the shortened. "Merrick," I say. She studies the entry and then says, "You should not do this." Silas, her tone is a probe then a plea. I put the ledger on my knee and fold my fingers across its spine. I answer in a way that matters only to the ledger. It helps me keep watch. It's a method. The words feel thin under Liska's eyes. She picks up a cup of water and sets it down with a click. "Method." She echoes, "You began this because of guilt, remember? You me that once." She says my name the way she used to in the supply room, when she would hand me bandages and smile in a way that suggested another life outside the camp. That small naming, Liska calling the ledger's origin guilt, pulls another shape from my chest. I do not speak. I show my fingers pressed into the ledger, the shallow lines of my knuckles paling. My hands betray more than my face. I turn the page and show her an older entry, a smear of ink and a thin brown stain at the margin where someone bled onto the paper. Liska's mouth sets. She leans closer and asks, "Do you ever think of Thomas?" The question lands like a stone. I breathe once, then say, "I hear him on the line." I feel the sentence land wrong. Thomas is a name I kept deliberately spare. He used to laugh when a wheel slipped off a cart in the town market. I remember how he wiped his hands on his trousers and cursed the cart. Now I hear his breath break on a rope. Liska pauses and says, "If it's Thomas, tell Cade immediately. He will send men for interrogation." You know how they proceed. Her warning is specific and cold. She does not hide the consequence. She unwraps a bandage, wraps it tighter, and stands. At dawn I take the work gangs to the tool line. The air is thin and the ground has a crust of frost. Thomas is bent over a wheel, sleeves rolled, hands steady despite night aches. I hear him before I see him, a repeated cadence, a half note on the second vowel that belongs to a man who sang in the market square. I stop and the cart lurches. He looks up. Thomas's face is smaller than I remember, his cheekbones sharper from hunger. He squints against the light and says, "Silas." He pronounces my name with the softness of someone testing whether a memory is real. My body answers before my mouth can. I freeze, then step closer in the way someone steps toward a loose nail on a board. My ledger is inside my coat. "Thomas," I say aloud, and taste the word as if it might disintegrate. I tell him where to stand and where to work, as if guiding a man in a task. In my head the ledger registers the cadence and pins a new mark next to his name. My chest tightens. The tilt of my shoulders changes. I have moved from observer to participant by the act of recognition. At midday, Cade corners me in the administrative hut. The wooden table smells of stew and damp paper. The camp clerk leans against a shelf, watching the exchange like someone waiting for rain to start. Cade sets his palm flat on my ledger and slides it toward him. Is that him? He asks, eyes fixed on the page. Can you pick him out by sound when the time comes? His voice narrows. He makes the ledger a weapon and me the wielder. I do not look him in the eye. I slide my finger over the shorthand that ties Thomas to a cadence. I hear Cade breathing behind the hut's thin wall. Yes, I say. The word is a hinge locking into place. Cade smiles without showing teeth and pushes a folded ration slip across the table. Do it cleanly, Silas, he says. Name him when he cries. I'll take care of the rest. Do that, and you will have a different schedule. Fail, and you will answer why you missed it. He taps the slip as if it were a promise. The camp clerk clears his throat and says nothing. I leave the hut with the ration slip burning in my jacket pocket. The gesture is a bargain. Compliance for small comforts. The ledger thumps against my chest like a metronome. I picture the cell block in the evening and the narrow doorway I used once to hear Marek. I see Thomas's hands scarred from cart axles. I imagine Cade's men waiting in the dark. My mouth tastes of iron. Night comes with a wind that drives grit into the lamps. The cell block corridor is narrow. Torches gutter and throw quick light across faces. Thomas sits on the bottom bunk, palms flat on his knees. He looks younger than the camp allows. He looks up when I appear at the cell door and asks, "Do you have a moment?" His voice is careful. He reaches for something he assumes exists between us. I press my ear to the thin bars because habit beats conscience. I listen for the cry that I would, by rule, name. I breathe in ragged pulls and feel each rib move. The memory of pressing my ear to a doorway in another corridor, when Marek's scream taught me to sort men, comes back not as a blur but as the exact scrape of wood against lint, the precise smell of wet stone. The past snaps into the present, a learned technique returning in muscle memory. Cade's silhouette appears behind me. He does not knock. His presence is the knock. Do it now, he says. His voice is low and the sentence is a blade. If you name him, this ends cleanly. If you don't, we'll call it oversight and move on. He expects me to function like a hing. The ledger would be the proof. Thomas shifts and says, "Silas, what is it?" His voice cracks. I feel the ledger inside my coat like a small stone. I imagine writing his name, then telling myself I had no choice. It's what keeps the camp orderly, I might think. I imagine slipping the ration slip back to Cade and saying I couldn't identify him. Both futures are quick, bright and precise. My hands tremble. I tell myself to steady them by tapping the ledger rhythmically. The motion is automatic. Cade steps forward. He says, "Name him, Silas." Name him now. The command pushes me toward the cell. I look at Thomas. He meets my eyes and for an instant I see the man from the market square, the man who cursed a cart axle and joked about rain. He looks small in that instant and then he looks like a prisoner again. I make the decision. It's Thomas, I say. Cade nods once. The nod is a seal. He turns to the guards waiting beyond the corridor and gives the order. Handles scrape. Boots move. Thomas swears a short sound of anger and then reaches for the bars with both hands. There is no dramatic pleading. He lunges, then the guards close in. They drag him out through the cell block exit into the yard where the punishments are kept. I watch his arms flail and the ledger in my hand vibrates with my pulse. I write the outcome on the ledger in a neat script. Thomas identified, transferred to interrogation. I do not add anything else. The yard fills with a small chorus of shouts. Someone calls Thomas's name. Someone else curses the guards for handling the man roughly. Cade walks past me, his coat brushing my shoulder. "Good work," he says. "Better times for you, Silas." The words are soft but absolute. Back in my shack, the candle sputters. I open the ledger and trace the fresh ink with my fingertip. There is a smear where a hand had struck a page. A thin brown spot blooms near Thomas's entry. My fingers come away with a faint stain. I press my thumb to my tongue to test the metallic taste. It is mine and it is not. I close the ledger and the cover feels heavier than it did that morning. Liska appears at the doorway without my hearing her approach. She stands in the dim, arms folded. "The medic's cart behind her like a shadow. You named him," she says. She does not ask how. She states a fact and then waits for me to react. I set the ledger on the table and push it toward her. "Why?" she asks. I do not answer immediately. Instead, I pull out the ration slip from my pocket and lay it next to the ledger. My breath catches and I hear the gust of wind against the shack's thin walls. I say, because Cade. Because he made me an offer. My voice is flat and the sentence is an explanation without defense. Liska shakes her head. You knew what would happen. You knew Thomas. You put his name in. Why, Silas? Her voice is not rhetorical, it is a demand for truth. I look at her and find my hands trying to steady the pen by tapping the ledger's cover again. I say, I thought I could control it. If I gave them a name when they asked, maybe I could keep others safe. Maybe giving a name was like keeping a balance. The words spill out as if confessing a hypothesis that needs testing. She slaps the table once. Balance. Thomas is not a ledger entry to test a theory on. He is a man. Her tone cracks. She says his name like a wound. You just wrote his death warrant in a neat line, Silas. Why would you think that saves anyone? Before I can answer, a distant whistle cuts through the night, the same whistle whose brass I touched during rounds. It is not melodic, it is a notice. I stand and feel something move under my sternum, not the abstract weight of guilt, but the concrete contraction of muscle when you pull back from a ledge. Liska moves toward the doorway, her hand rests on mine for 1 second, light as a promise, and gone. Outside, the yard is a hive of ordered cruelty. I watch from my doorway. Guards return without Thomas and with him dragged between 2 men. They carry him past Cade, who gives a curt nod and steps into the light. Thomas looks at me as they move him away and, for an instant, his eyes find mine and search for an answer I do not have. I pick up the ledger and open to the new entry. My name is not in it as a perpetrator, it is a notation. Identification confirmed. I close the book and press my palm flat against the cover until my fingers go white. The sound of the whistle repeats, 3 short calls, and that sound is now an instrument tied to my choice. In the quiet just before dawn, I place the ration slip on top of the ledger and set the battered brass whistle beside it. The ledger will sit on the desk with a smear of ink and a darker stain beneath Thomas's entry. I turn the light down and listen for footsteps on the path. The whistle's echo reaches my ear and I feel an obligation settle, concrete and horrible. I must be at the yard when they return him. I cannot sleep. I fold my coat over my knees and breathe in the oil and smoke scent that clings to me. The ledger sits between my hands like a small, obedient animal that does not know its own hunger. The decision has been made and the immediate consequence resolved. The chapter has closed on the act I committed. But as the first grey of morning steals across the horizon, there is another sound, a quick knock at my door. Liska's voice follows, soft but urgent. Silas. Cade has orders. Now her words are a new event, a new demand. I stand up and pick the ledger and the whistle. I hook the rusted keyring to my belt and step into the cold. The yard waits, lit and ready. The ledger is heavier than when I first wrote Marek's name, heavier than the day I pressed my ear to the doorway to learn a cadence. I put my hand over the cover, then pocket it. The whistle sits cold against my palm. I walk out toward the gate and the men with torches, and the ledger's spine cuts into my hip like the beginning of a sentence that will not let me stop speaking. A man collapses in the yard and lets out a scream that nails me to the platform. The scream is a sound I own on paper. Shame sits under my ribs the moment I hear the second note, and I do not move. My hand finishes the name already started on the page. I write with the same small, neat letters I have used for months. I write because the ledger tells me where pain goes, and because writing keeps my fingers from shaking. Shame is the first engine of everything I do that night. I know that naming is not neutral. Naming feeds others. I know the ledger has stopped being a private catalogue and has become a map other men read to find a face. That realization tightens my jaw and forces my fingers to slow. I hear a guard shout a roster into the dark. The roster is a list. My list slips into someone else's hands when Kovac looks up at me from the ladder with a question in his eyes. The yard glitters with rain. Men bend over with wet tools, boots throwing up small sprays. The collapsed prisoner gasps and drags breath, his toes scraping gravel. Jonah shouts back and forth to a pair of prisoners holding a stretcher. Who is that? Someone calls. The question lands on my ledger like an accusation. I only have the name because I matched a scream to a man's throat. I hear my own voice in my head repeating the rhythmic. Marek, Marek. The sound had 3 syllables in my head before it had them in the dark. I climb down from the platform with the ledger pressed flat against my chest. The ledger is a small book with a frayed cover. The ink has bled in places where I touched the page with wet fingers. I owe no one an explanation. I owe everyone. Kovac watches as I move. Kovac's damp collar glints by candlelight. He smells of boiled tobacco and canvas. He sits in a high fold of authority that moves like a shadow over everything in the compound. Silas Venn is the man who listens. I say my name only in action now. I tilt my head, I count beats, I mark the page. I learned to listen the first week at the camp. At 38 I still move as if a ledger can keep order when men break. My hands are lean and my knuckles split along a groove I rub when thinking. I keep the whistle in my mouth only when the wind is loud. I keep my ledger under my coat at night. Jonas meets me at the edge of the yard. You saw him, Jonas says. Jonas's voice is short, rough. He calls me by name like he is trying to make me human. Silas, who is that? Merrick, I say. I close the ledger. My voice is steady. I let the syllable fall in the space between us. Jonas's eyes narrow. Merrick, you wrote that down. I hold the ledger out a fraction. I wrote it. Jonas takes a step closer and taps the cover with a finger. He smells of wet leather and nicotine. Why do you have this? He asks. He says the question like a guard who wants to accuse but needs proof. Before I can answer, Kovac climbs down. He wipes rain from his brows with the back of a calloused hand. He does not smile. Show me. Kovac orders. His voice is not loud, but it carries the sort of weight that makes men shift. He speaks my name once, like a ledger citation. Silas, show me your list. I weigh the ledger against the habit of keeping records. The ledger started as an attempt to bring order. Who screamed in a certain pitch, who began coughing after a day's labor, who had a tremor that meant a broken bone. I thought that ordering sound would protect me from surprise. Instead it taught the camp where to point its punishments. I lead them to the raised supervision platform. Jonas follows close. Kovac holds a small lamp and angles it toward the ledger when I open it. The flicker throws small pale ellipses across the page. My handwriting looks like a list of groceries. Names marks beside names showing patterns. A small vertical line for a sting that croaks out on the second exhale. A circle when the voice breaks on the third syllable. Kovac leans in and traces a finger over a set of marks. This is useful, he says. He pronounces the last word like a verdict. Jonas shifts his weight and looks from Kovac to me. You have more than a list. Jonas says you have power. His tone is narrow and accusing. He says the thing everyone thinks but does not articulate. My throat tightens. My fingers slide closed over the ledger. I wrote what I heard, I say. I keep the sentence bare. Jonas snatches the book from my hands as if removing a weapon. He drops it open and reads names aloud, syllable by syllable. Marek, Pavel, Drasko. Each name lands in the platform's damp air like a stone. The men nearby look up at the sound. They begin to understand how the ledger will be used. The ledger is no longer a private compulsion. It is a catalogue that a warden can consult to pick the man who will be broken next. Kovac steps back and picks at a seam in his coat. Silas, he says, we have to be efficient. Who here shows a pattern we can break quick. Who cries for help and looks like he will cooperate. An emotion slides under the shame, a cold calculation. A shift follows. Shame gives way to dread when I see how quickly Kovac translates my observations into orders. I feel dread in the hollow of my throat. I weigh the ledger in my hands and realize I have enabled selection. I speak without thinking the exact words. You can choose from here. The sentence is a lance. Jonas's mouth opens. You hear that? He says pick from the list. Kovac looks at me, and for a second I see the ledger reflected in his pupils. He asks who will break quickest, who will give up on the second lash. My mouth fills with the taste of iron. The ledger is organized by cry, by breath pattern, by how quickly a throat closes over a curse. I map those sounds the way other men map marching rotes. My map has become a list of casualties. My hands move and I point to a name. They expect me to point at Merrick. I point instead at another man whose marks indicate a thin, high scream that Titan folds in 6 seconds. I point at a man I have noted but barely looked at. My heart beats a fast metronome in my chest. My choice is deliberate. It is a small attempt to reassert control over an impossible situation. Kovac nods. Good. Jonas, prepare the block. Kovac's voice is the snap of a command. Jonas runs off to fetch the keyring. Men move through the compound with the practiced efficiency of the damned. The yard tightens into a sequence of tasks. One man drags, two carry, three secure. At roll call, Marek locks eyes on me. He does not shout, he only stares. The look is a thin accusation, like the line a man draws on a table with a fingernail. It spreads over the yard. The other prisoners pick up the gesture and watch my hands. Marek knows me because I have written him in ink. He knows I catalogued his pain and turned it into a target. Silas, Marek mouths when the guards pass. He says my name without sound, but the motion carries. Jonas sees it and smacks Marek's shoulder with his baton. Keep your face down, Jonas says. You speak out, you get more of it. The tiny public condemnation plucks at strands of my composure. An emotion shift moves inside me. Dread curves toward a strange, cold clarity. I can feel the ledger's purpose press against my chest. The clarity tells me two things at once. The ledger is a weapon in other hands, and I am the only one who understands how it points. Back in the shack, Jonas pushes the ledger across the table. Why keep this? He asks again. He keeps poking that place where I have hung my shame. Why hoard a thing that decides who breaks? I set my palm on the book. The candle throws a small circle of light. Rain ticks against the tin roof. I kept it to remember who screamed like what, I say. My fingers trace names I do not like to speak, to know the difference between a cry that ends quickly and one that never ends. Jonas leans closer. Sounds like you kept a list of weaknesses, he says. His voice is accusatory and quick. He tries to make me small with words. You knew how to pick them. I didn't know your men would use it like this, I say. My voice is low. I push the ledger away from me. I wrote to keep from being surprised. Jonas laughs once, short and hard. You weren't surprised. You were prepared. He snatches the whistle from my coat and flips it in his fingers. Prepared to name who bows first. Prepared to choose. Jonas's accusation is a motion toward a decision I have been evading. He wants the ledger. He wants the power. He wants to make me prove I am not a traitor to the rules that guard the guards. When Kovac calls me to his canvas tent, the air is heavier. He closes the flap behind us and sets a lantern on a crate. The light is yellow and close. It reveals the sweat at his temples and the damp on his neck. Silas, Kovac says, tell me truthfully. Did you make this to help them or to help yourself? I look at the ledger lying on the crate. The pages have fingerprints in the margins and small smudges where rain has blurred ink. I look at Kovac and say, I made it to hold the noise so it wouldn't surprise me again. I keep the sentence simple. To hold the names so I could sleep between shifts. Kovac's jaw moves. You kept a ledger while men broke. You kept a ledger while they died. That is either cowardice or a kind of cruelty. Which is it, Silas? His eyes search mine like a man checking for spoilage. I feel all the effects of his question like a physical pressure. Shame flares and then cools into something else. A tight, furious resolve to not let them use my book as an instrument without a contorted bargain. I could hand it over and watch the camp become its own executioner with my handwriting as a guide, or I could do something that changes how they use the page. Kovac waits. He expects a surrender. Jonas waits in the doorway with the whistle between his teeth and impatience in his hands. Marek's stare from the yard is a constant that sits behind my eyelids when I close them. I push the ledger toward Kovac instead. Take it, I say, pick who you will. The words come out more like a dare than a plea. Silence sits in the tent with us for a long, clean moment. Kovac lifts the book but does not open it. He looks at me. You risked your life keeping it, Silas. You make it sound like charity to give it away. I put my hand flat on the ledger again and turn it so my index finger rests on my own name. I will not choose a man to be broken while I stand with a pen in my hand, I say. My voice tightens. I will trade myself for the one you ask me to name. Kovac blinks. The lantern flame thrashes with the motion. You mean you want to take the place of the chosen man? He asks, not fully believing the arrangement could be real. I nod. The ledger feels heavier when I lift it now. Yes, name him. I will take his place. Jonas storms into the tent, face flushed. You can't be serious, Silas. You can't offer yourself for this. Jonas, Kovac says in that measured tone that slices conversation into ordered pieces. We have a choice. Either we use the ledger and break men according to what it says, or we accept this offer. Jonas's mouth moves. He opens and closes his hands like he is counting options. We cannot let a guard throw himself at us to avoid work, he says. It makes us look soft. Kovac's patience narrows. Silas, why would you give up your rank? Why would you step into the block instead of naming a man who answers to the ledger? I do not explain the ledger's escape into his hands. I do not tell him that each name I wrote is a list for his cruelty. I tell him instead what the ledger has done to me. Because I cannot live with knowing the acoustics of someone else's breaking and do nothing. I cannot keep mapping the sound of someone being taken apart while sleep presses my face to a pillow. Marek's face flashes in the tense thin curtains, as if the yard itself had come close enough for him to peer in. Kovac's hand flexes on the ledger. You will be made example of, Silas. You will be broken so others learn not to keep lists. I let him say it. In that sentence, the last of my shame shifts into something like acceptance. The emotion has moved 3 times now. Shame to dread to resigned resolve. My body responds with small details. My knuckles go white on the ledger's edge. My jaw tightens. I breathe with small, hard pulls. The decision is carried out in the center of the punishment block at midnight. The bell rings 3 thin times and men gather. Jonas is at my side but does not touch me. Kovac stands with the ledger in his hand and a pair of keys on his belt. Prisoners press close to the rails. They watch because they want to see whether the man who named them will follow his own map. Silas, Kovac says to the crowd, and his voice modulates to a level the yard can hear. We have a list. One of our guards has volunteered for a correction in place of the man chosen by the ledger. Kovac lets the pause hang like a test. A murmur moves along the rail. Marek watches with his head cocked. Jonas's jaw works. Silas volunteered. Kovac continues. He offered himself. I stand in the ring formed by torchlight. My coat is damp. My gloves are off. When Kovac asks who will be broken, he does not look at the ledger. He looks at me. He expects me to point to a man. I do not point. I step forward and hold out the ledger. I will be the man named. I say, take me. Marek's hand tightens on the rail. Silas, he whispers, half accusation, half prayer. Why would you do that? Because I wrote you down, I say. My voice is steady, because I turned your cry into a map. I cannot take that and let others use it. Kovac gives a single, curt bark of a laugh, then signals to Jonas. The guards lead me toward the block. The ledger remains at the center of the yard for a moment, wet ink catching the torchlight. The punishment itself is a calculus of noise and order. I feel each lash as an arithmetic on my skin. My body counts. 1, 2, 3. Between blows I listen to sounds, the damp slap of leather, the grunt of the man securing straps, the creak of the block. Each element is exact and each sound is a line in the ledger of my life. Marek watches me from behind the bars. He does not shout. When a guard drags me by an elbow past him, his eyes find mine for a breath and hold. I do not attempt to move. My face is wet. The ledger sits in the mud as the rain loosens into a thin sheet. The ink runs toward a margin and blurs a name. After it is done, they lead me back to the shack with a rope cutting into my wrists. My coat lies folded on a crate. Jonas slaps me once on the shoulder so hard my teeth click. You idiot, he says, you threw yourself away. Jonas, I reply, which is less a defense than a recognition. He breathes heavy. You could have handed it over quietly. You could have refused. He looks at the ledger lying in the corner, the pages curling where rain touched them. Why would you stop them with yourself? He demands, why not stop them by refusing to keep lists and letting them stumble? I close my eyes and feel the ropes bite, because I had names in my hand that night when Marek screamed. I say, I would have to look at them and know I had given them away. If I do not take the place, the ledger stays, and people read my handwriting like instructions. Jonas grunts and turns away. Marek's voice comes through the open doorway, low and precise. Silas, he says, you didn't have to fix it alone. My answer is a half sound, a cough. I thought I could keep order. I thought lists made me useful. I was wrong. They tie the ledger to a stake near the compound gate and set a match near it. Kovac orders the page to be burned, as if fire can wash away handwriting. The candle flame eats the ink in a slow, ragged way. The pages curl and blacken. I stand with my wrists scarred and watch ash fall into puddles. The ledger's smolder becomes the new pattern in the yard. Men draw nearer to the fire for warmth and for a spectacle. Kovac gives cold orders the way a man gives arithmetic, precise, necessary. The prisoners shift. Marek's eyes find the ash in the rain, and I see him bend away as if seeing a small reminder of a wound. The ledger does not erase the fact that a man was broken. It does not erase the fact that I kept a list. What it does is make one thing very clear: my naming was not neutral. My naming could be used as a tool of cruelty by any hand that knew how to read my ticks. I traded my rank for a body so the ledger would not be read the same way again. In the pre-dawn, as men move back to work, Jonas helps me sit on a crate. He unwinds the rope from my wrists, while the wound on my back throbs. "You knew what would happen if they took your list," Jonas says. He sounds like a man making a diagnosis, so why pick yourself? "Because a name I wrote should not be the lever that breaks another man," I say, because I could not, in good conscience, keep the sound of a throat and let it decide who dies next. Jonas grunts. He looks at me for a long moment, and the rain finishes washing the ash into a smear. "You are not heroic," he says. "You are a fool." He helps me stand. I test my shoulders and feel the pull of a new kind of balance. My rank is the same on paper, but the men who watched me before have a different ledger to consult now. A ledger of my actions. Marek limps past on the way to his shift. He looks at me, and there is neither forgiveness nor accusation in his face. There is only the way a man looks at another man who has chosen a certain hurt. The camp will reorder itself around that choice. Kovac will keep giving orders, and Jonas will keep following them in the same patterned way guards follow habit. The prisoners will keep surviving in rotated shifts of pain and rest. I will keep listening, only now the sound in my ear is different. My hearing is calibrated to a new ledger, the ledger of what I committed to and what I allowed. When the ledger smolders into a wet ash the next day, Kovac keeps the charred cover as a reminder of authority and of control. Jonas pockets a corner of a burned page like a talisman. Marek watches the remains from a distance and does not speak. My hands are raw and marked, but they hold a faint, steady certainty. I will answer the questions I have asked with my body, not with maps for others. The final note of the night is not a poetic lesson, it is a practical one. The ledger is burned, but a list can be rebuilt with a single careful ear. In the quiet that follows, Kovac names another roster and passes the task along. The ledger's ashes will not stop men from listening, but they will remember that the man who catalogued cries stepped into the ring instead of pointing from the platform. I wake the next morning and tie a small bandage over the raw skin on my wrists. My hands still shake when I take the whistle from my coat. Jonas stands by the door and hands me the ledger's blackened spine, not the book itself, but a charred scrap Kovac kept. "Keep that," Jonas says, as a reminder. I take it. It is a piece of my handwriting turned fossil. The ash rubs into the palm of my hand. Marek passes by and nods once, the motion small and human. "Silas," he says, and there is no accusation in the syllable. "Thank you," or something like it. I nod back. The word I want to say would be too broad to hold in the damp morning air. Instead, I fold my fingers over the charred scrap and keep moving. The ledger's reckoning altered the camp that night. It did not free anyone. It changed some balances, shifted where blame could sit, and left a new wound that men will remember by sound. The ledger's pages are gone, but the memory of my choice is not. I will walk with it. The camp will watch. The last scene of that night is not a farewell, it is a simple, solid event. Kovac keys the lock on the punishment block and walks away toward his canvas tent, while the prisoners return to their benches. I stand and listen to the clink of the key. That sound is a decision made audible, and it is the last concrete thing in the chapter. I keep the charred scrap in my palm until the key's echo fades. Emotion root, shame, emotion shifts, shame, dread, clarity, resigned resolve. The ledger's reckoning resolves the chapter's mini-conflict. The ledger's existence and how it will be used. The ledger is destroyed as an object, but the consequences of naming remain, and the story closes with a concrete act, Kovac locking the punishment block, not a vague promise. The characters' arcs have closed. Jonas, Kovac, Marek, and I changed roles. Kovac retains authority, Jonas keeps his pragmatic hardness, Marek keeps his watchful caution, and I have traded secrecy for bodily consequence. The ledger no longer guides names, my choice does.